You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
Happy to have joining us again from Project 21, the National Leadership Network of Black Conservatives, which is associated with the National Center for Public Policy. Horace Cooper is the co-chairman of Project 21, and surprisingly, you're a very busy man, because it says here that you do over 400 radio hits a year, and that's certainly an awful lot of work, and I know that you write on so many issues and work with so many different organizations. But Horace, it's a pleasure to have you joining us, Brett and John, on the Final Say Radio Show. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on today, and I think today is a good topic for us to talk about, how it's important for all the voices that exist in America to participate in this dialogue that we have on issues like race.
Well, it certainly is, and now this is a very interesting story and an interesting ruling, in fact, for those of us who, for one reason or another, love to follow what the Supreme Court's looking at and all these different types of, I guess you could call it social issues. But to me, I think they're extremely important issues that touch on other areas, such as economics and free markets and things of that nature. And I think it's very interesting that, well, I guess if you look at this ruling, I'm not surprised that they ruled this way, but I think that some of the comments, especially the dissenting writings of Sotomayor, were very interesting in this case.
Well, absolutely. One of the fortuitous outcomes of this event, of this ruling, is the idea that the American people are responsible to make many of these choices. Affirmative action, and many of the critics, including myself, look at it and say, I understand the interesting and noble ideas motivating it, but I also see the significant consequences, the costs, and the divisions that flow from it. That's part of the process in a democratic system, to allow people to work their way through it. What we've seen in the past, when progressives had more sway over the Supreme Court, is they decided they had the right answer to the big questions of the day, and they simply were going to impose them by fiat, by pretending that the Constitution locked us in to certain positions. What was really refreshing about the ruling was its primary emphasis on suggesting there simply wasn't a role for the court to play here in deciding which side was right and which side was wrong.
That's very interesting. Now, Horace, I have to say this because to qualify you as the expert you are, you actually taught constitutional law, and I applaud you for that, at George Mason University, which is in Virginia. And so if anyone knows what they're talking about on these issues, it's certainly you. And I think it's very interesting that, that this was upheld. But I have to ask you this question, how you think it's going to impact some of the other states, maybe some of the more even liberal states than Michigan. Will they look at this case and start doing away with some of their affirmative action programs?
Well, that's our hope, is that people are going to see that when the opportunity to hear the question, are you for the colorblind society that Martin Luther King talked about and hoped for over 50 years ago? Or are you going to be for a system where the government comes in, picks winners, losers, continues to say that the major way that jobs or school opportunities or contracts are going to be allocated have nothing to do or little to do with the skill set of the individuals involved, but almost everything to do with either the gender or the race. One of the most intriguing things about the data set that flowed from the Michigan election was the fact that we saw in, say, Detroit city limits, twice as many, 2 times as many voters supporting who were black, supporting this amendment, than supported the Republican ticket in that particular community. What this shows is that it goes beyond partisanship, it goes beyond ideology, and it is an attractive option that I imagine that we're going to start seeing states, blue and red, understand, appreciate, and adopt.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I hope you're right, and we're certainly rooting for that. You know, I have to share something from personal experience because I've attended a couple different schools working on a master's in taxation. Why I'm doing that, that's another story. But and of course, I've had different careers through it. Like most people, we do different things, we move on, and so. But I've actually had, I guess, the pleasure of witnessing this issue at hand, because I've been in the classroom with people who really didn't belong in that classroom. In fact, you could tell that they were getting poor grades, they weren't able to participate, they didn't really understand the concepts that were being taught, and then somehow you'd see them in the next class and the next class and the next class, and the only conclusion you could draw is that the program itself is somehow accepting these students to whatever the minimum level is for them to stay in the program. In a lot of cases, most schools, to my knowledge, you have to have at least a B average to stay in a master's program. And so myself, working very hard to get straight A's through this program and maintain a 4.0, it was a little upsetting to me. And I'm sure I'm not the only one.
Well, one of the things that a lot of people have discovered, both black and white, is the terrible lesson, and it's a two-sided coin lesson that is learned when you mismatch students with the academy. When you take moderate or average or even above average individuals and you place them in places that are significantly elevated, exceptional, and you ask them to compete, it's the same thing as saying you're the smartest, most talented 5'7" basketball player we've ever seen. Now we're going to put you in the NBA where they have more than a foot gap advantage on you. That's a mismatch, and it's destined for failure. And what we have seen happening in the academy is that these moderately capable, even above average capable individuals think they're not able to compete, and when they flunk out, they conclude erroneously that they're simply not college material, making a group of people who could be able to excel at a state school or less challenging institutions and enter into the workplace and contribute and demonstrate their prowess. Those people are all washouts and erroneously learn the lesson. Now, the other side of the coin is there are all these people who are in this exceptional category at these schools, and they may not have had as much experience or exposure to minorities. And what lesson do we teach these very, very bright people? Yes, you can tell who can achieve and who cannot by their skin color. That is a terrible lesson on both sides, taking people who could succeed in the right forum and putting them in the wrong one, making them think they can't, and telling people who are talented and capable and who are likely to be influencers later in life the wrong lesson about how improperly capable minorities are. This is one of the terrible tragedies that we have found with how affirmative action works.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention before John jumps in here with a few questions, one of the programs, I was as much the minority as you could possibly be. In other words, if there were 100 people in the program, there were maybe 3 or 4 white males in that program, but to be honest with you, it was a great experience for me because I met a lot of people from all different backgrounds that I don't necessarily normally find myself with, because there were a lot of people with the school that I went to that come from some areas that I just don't live near, and so I don't get to experience that. And it was wonderful in that respect. But of course, academically, there were a lot of issues. So I just wanted to mention that. So there is a little bit of good, a little bit of bad. Go ahead, John.
Well, this is one of the reasons that Justice Thomas commented to a reporter that he got to see firsthand how poorly these programs were operating.
Hey, good point.
How poorly, the setback they were for minorities.
Yeah,
John?
Horace is spot on, but I think there's actually the third leg here, which we left out, which is the personal insult or affront to those who, against all odds, achieved and actually earned it 100% on their own merit, and in many cases, like a salmon swimming uphill both ways. And I'm sure you know many folks, conservative or otherwise, with dark skin, who said, you know what, I didn't have any break, everything went against me, and yet I took that as almost like somebody in a gym, just deciding I'm going to lift those weights until I develop my muscles instead of atrophying, and I'm going to prove otherwise. And many of those people, unfortunately, often have to yield because of affirmative action. They're faced with a stigma of having people assume, well, somebody handed that to you, and I've had many people tell me that's a huge affront to them. And by the way, that doesn't just come from the white community; it often comes from within their own community.
Yeah. Well, if you take a typical university with selective admissions, let's take my alma mater, the University of Texas. They went to a race-neutral admissions program, but they experimented for a couple of years just recently with this race-centered or race-based admissions program. And if you have a process where 25,000 people apply and only 4 or 5% of those individuals are going to succeed ultimately, you have a large number of people who feel that they didn't get the opportunity that they sought. But they accept that because they say, well, someone more competent, more talented got the spot in my place. Well, with the race-based admissions component, you create this problem of every minority that's admitted, people who didn't get in, who don't know whether that person got in by just the regular competitive means or whether they got in through the race-based means, look and say, you took my spot. Now remember, we're only going to give 4 or 5% of the applicants a chance anyway. Why would you want a system that says to the 95% who didn't get selected, look over there, that's the guy or gal who took your spot? This is divisive, and it ends up not actually helping the very people who it's targeted with. The stigma is real, the division is real, and the typical mismatch. Here's the irony. If the person could be admitted through the regular admissions program, why do you need to let them in through the race-based admissions program? If they're going to be able to succeed and compete and do fine, let them come in through that door. We don't know, but we've seen a lot of studies, we don't know how negatively it is that the performances are. We're seeing somewhere between a 60 or 70% failure rate or failure to complete to graduation rate among these minority admittees through race-based admissions programs. That's a terrible, terrible outcome. And as I mentioned before, the divisions that are caused by it are untold.
Well, I think they are. I would only disagree in style here. I think it is told. It's told in the fact that we have now an enormous. I think we're having some setback in race relations because in society and in business, I see an enormous equaling of the playing field. But when you look at the voting at the polls, and if you look at the 51 versus 49% divide or whatever the exact number is, we're actually creating and manufacturing divisiveness where it doesn't need to appear, and that's sad. I will say, by the way, that I actually celebrate extra challenge, right? It's that life is not fair. Society is it fair that a lion has bigger teeth than a rabbit, right? I mean, life just isn't necessarily fair. And part of the human condition, part of the condition of all animals in the animal kingdom, is you have to understand the weaknesses, whether they're inherited physically or whether they're social, and you absolutely have to learn to use that to your advantage. And competition breeds character, it breeds success, and you always have to ask yourself, do you want your heart surgeon or your pilot being somebody who might have been there because of some type of a political or judicial decision, as opposed to that person being the most qualified? I think most people, that would be a resounding no way.
Well, it has been important to make sure that people understand that there is no movement in America to prevent people who are skilled and capable of being able to compete and share their skills. That's a very, very important conversation to have. And when someone like Justice Sotomayor implies that, A, if you want a colorblind society, you are in essence walking in the shoes of the segregationists, that actually hurts our ability to have the conversation that we need to be able to have. That there is nothing like Martin Luther King's vision of the colorblind society and the segregationist who stood at the door of the schoolhouse and said, you will not attend here. You will not be able to vote here. You will not be able to work here. You will not have a contract here. You cannot enter through this door. There is nothing like that when you compare it with the colorblind society. And as I said, when that option is presented, increasingly a number of blacks support it, embrace it, even if they don't necessarily change their particular voting practices. I think if you can get the colorblind society going forward, as we have been doing in fits and starts in this country, but if we can get this principle adopted state by state, you will see more and more and more Americans, black, white, and brown, look at what I can do in a competitive environment when I'm unleashed and I can compete free from any shackling. That can likely lead them to reassess, wait a second, one political party wants to limit my opportunity and my ambition, and the other wants to reward it. Maybe I need to realign my voting pattern.
That's a great point. Horace, I just want to point out a couple things here. One is that there are some incredibly talented, wonderful, and successful people from all backgrounds. White, black, Asian, various religions, sexes. It doesn't matter. I mean, there's so many different examples. And, of course, we know that, I'll just use a couple quick ones that, you said one already, Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. I would mention Alan West, a former member of Congress, Condoleezza Rice, other people who've come under attack because of their political, the political side of the aisle that they fall under, and that's a shame because, all white people shouldn't be Republicans or this way, and all black people shouldn't be the one side and the other. It shouldn't be like that. We should all just be what we really believe in as individuals. And I also want to mention this, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this. When a kid goes through a K through 12 education, where there are so many issues that they move on to the next grade when they're not prepared for it, and then they're thrown into a college situation, and a tool like affirmative action is used to put them somewhere where they may not be prepared for, they're taking on an excessive cost for education. Whether they're paying for it or somebody else is paying for it, it's an excessive and extreme cost. And it's being wasted, as you said, in 60 to 70% of the cases, and it's a shame because what we really need to do is go back to the areas that are failing young people and failing innocent students at a very young age and correct that issue at the lowest level, starting in pre-K or kindergarten.
One of the things that, in addition to continuing to push the effort for the colorblind society, is that we need to challenge the alliance that local government heads, mayors and city councils and county governments have made with the teachers' unions. Much of their experience has been to stymie the ability of these young people to get the kind of basic training that they need. The 21st century civil rights agenda ought to be, how do we figure out how parents who genuinely are interested in getting the best kind of education for their kids possible, soonest as they can, how do we figure out how to make that happen? Does that mean something like, let's welcome the Catholic Church back into the center of our community? Let's welcome Protestant churches. Let's welcome for-profit schools. Let's welcome a lot of varying types of educational institutions back in and say to them, we're going to judge you by how well your kids graduate and achieve, rather than our preconceived notions that, oh, we don't want this particular message taught, oh, how dare you make a profit while you're doing this, and all manner of measures that have gotten in the way of the overall mission. We should have come together as a country with this idea. The goal is you can actually read the diploma when you get ready to graduate, not we care so much about all the stuff that went on as a result of getting there. Some families are going to want to go with a traditional religious institution. Some are going to want to go with a high emphasis on math and science. But whatever those are, we ought to be trying to figure out as society, what are we doing to make that possible? And it starts with severing the relationship between the teachers' unions and most of the political leaders in local communities.
Amen to that. Great, Horace. It's a great segment. I want to give you the opportunity to give us your website and anything else you'd like so people could follow what you're working on.
Yeah, check us out at www.nationalcenter.org, and you can also get us on Twitter at Project 21, and we're going to be releasing a white paper in the next 6 weeks outlining how much of what people know of the modern labor law regime, that's minimum wage, the 40-hour work week, contractor pay, and the like, were in fact created primarily by segregationists designed to make it harder for black people to compete, and why those policies still have the similar effect of making it harder for individuals, minority or otherwise, to be able to break in to opportunities like those.
Excellent. Well, Horace Cooper, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon. We'll speak to you again soon. Take care.
Thanks. All right, thank you.